Sazh story, heads or tails, which is basically gambling DLC for Final Fantasy XIII-2. Which is something I initially ignored when I played through that game, because honestly, when I play through a game like an RPG, I don't really do a lot of side stuff in general. So like adding in DLC rarely, is super, super appealing to me, like as I'm just trying to like finish a video game at times. But returning to Final Fantasy XIII-2's DLC, like essentially 8 years after the fact, it's kind of ready to like just hop into that game and like check out what was going on with that DLC. And I recently took an interest in gambling games. I was watching like pachinko streams and stuff like that. And so I was kind of curious about looking at what Sazh Heads or Tail was, is like, what would a Final Fantasy, in some ways kind of story-based gambling game would be, even though, it is not a full game on its own. It's just kind of its own little segment of Final Fantasy XIII-2. But basically, this is a game that features Sazh from Final Fantasy XIII, who plays a minor role in XIII-2. And he ends up getting he's like flying in a ship, and I don't know if they ever really give any context, but he more or less just gets whisked away to a casino dimension where he's once again separated from his son and has to basically gamble to get his son back. So there's like no combat in this DLC, so you're not getting any like Final Fantasy XIII-2 gameplay. What you are getting are basically two different types of card games, and those are really the main focus, although there is also like a bonus slots mini game as well, where you can play the slot machine that, as far as I can tell, doesn't really have any real like place in the story. It's just there to be like, hey, if you want to play slots and this is gambling DLC, here you go. I played it for a little bit and left it on like auto for a little bit, and I never won anything, so I kind of gave up on it. But it seemed like it was kind of like a minor attraction compared to the two main card games. So the two card games are poker, and then there's also like a exclusive game called Chronobind. And initially it's a little intimidating because if you don't know the rules of these games, and Chronobind is an exclusive game to this thing, so you won't know the rules, the game does not do a particularly good job of like onboarding you onto these card games. It's like just basically kind of giant text boxes with instructions, no pictures, no nothing. So a lot of times it just kind of feels like I'm reading these instructions, but I have like no visual connection to, like what these actual things are and like how they'll actually play out. I'm just kind of like getting the general concept. So the poker, we'll get into that in a little bit, but Chronobind, you're going to be kind of learning this thing from scratch, jumping into it. So it takes a little while to really figure out, but once you figure out, it is a really cool clock-based gambling game. So essentially, there's a giant clock in the middle of the gambling table, and on that clock, the bets land on like certain numbers on. So when you play a card, they will put like money down on that place that you played a card to. And basically, whenever a player gets the high card, so they have like a king versus like somebody's queen or something like that, right? They get the ability to move the clock. So you basically turn the clock around based off like the number on your actual cards. And basically what this does is it allows you to move the hand and then also kind of try to land on different bets and things like that. Or different, like what they're called binds is what they are. You don't have the ability to like manually put in a certain amount of money. The game just kind of automatically increases the stakes of the game as you play through. And when you are playing the game, you can actually wind the hand past the 12 mark, and that will basically increase the amount each bet is as well. So if you wind the clock, it basically increases the amount of money that's on the line essentially. And there's a little bit of like fun playing you can do in terms of like where bets actually go, because your card essentially determines like what card you put down determines where that bet goes. So if you have like 3 threes, you can actually play all threes at once, and it will basically put 3 bets on that 3 essentially. So you can make one number on the board be significantly higher than the others just by playing a bunch of the same card. And then also like you can play low cards knowing that you're not going to get control of the board, but where you want to put extra money. So when you get control of the board, you can go ahead and utilize that kind of thing. So what happens is there could be up to like 4 of these bets on each card, or on each number, which is like a bind again. And then the higher the bind is, like the more winnings you get from like landing on that bind. So when you're playing the game, you have to basically kind of do this back and forth between trying to make sure that you're like still capable of controlling the board itself by playing high numbers and things like that. But then also, knowing when to actually cash out when you get there, because if you land on like a 1 bind or something like that, you're not going to get a lot of money from that. So you might choose not to actually cash out and keep the game going instead. And there's like another element on top of it, which is like the higher card is not always the one with the highest number. Like if you land on a 2, technically 2 is the higher number now. But when you put that 2 down and you win that bid or whatever, you can only move 2 spaces, because the number of ways you can move the hand is only based off the card you actually played. So it's a really interesting balance between being able to win hands, making sure you can get control of the clock, and then also putting down numbers that actually will get you where you want to go on the board itself. So it's a really cool game, and while it may not be like as as much on the line as like poker is, which we'll talk about in a little bit, it definitely is like a fun way to kind of like play a balanced game where you're not necessarily putting everything on the line all at once. Poker is more or less just poker, right? I mean, I don't think I need to really tell you guys that much about poker. I say that, but honestly, going into this game, I didn't really know how poker worked, honestly. So, if you need a quick rundown of what poker is, essentially, I had to look up some outside resources to help me in this case. So if you're coming in fresh, you might need to do that too. But each player gets 2 cards, and then as the match goes on, basically there's cards that like are laid out on the table, and the 2 cards in your hand you have to use to make pairs and like combinations of different types of cards, like counting up, or sometimes just using the same, like I think they're called these suits or something like that, the symbol on the card, and like getting a higher ranking combination than the other players. But you only have 2 cards the whole time, and all the cards on the table are like what everybody's comparing their 2 cards to, kind of thing. So and there's definitely like a more, like if you're trying to get the most money in this game, poker is definitely the way to do it, because it's like you can kind of control your own bet. You can raise the bid if you're more confident in your hand, or if you want to like hold, because your hand's not great, you can basically like bid the most minimum bid. Or if you don't want to lose as much money, if you're looking at it and you're like, oh, I don't have anything, then you can more or less fold early on and basically get out. You'll still lose money, but it won't be as bad as if you waited to later in the match. And it took me a while personally to kind of figure out the best way to play. Like I said, I haven't really played poker before. So I think it's something you just kind of more or less have to feel out. It took me probably about an hour, I feel like, to really get a hang of like when I could hang on and when I just had to fold and get out of there as soon as possible. And obviously, at the end of the day, the other person on the other side of you might have a royal flush, right? Or something like that, which I think is like the highest one, which is like, I think all the like special cards like Jack, Queen, all that stuff. It's interesting, but I'd imagine more or less it's just poker. It's probably more interesting to me just because I haven't really played poker before. Now, one thing I am aware of being a part of poker, I will say, just from what I've heard, is bluffing is like a part of poker. Like, you might have a really crappy hand, but with how you bet and bid money, you can kind of trick people to, retiring early and things like that. And they do mention in the instructions for this game that bluffing is a part of poker in this game or whatever. They don't really give you details of exactly what that means or how you read that from the player. And I'll be honest with you, in the time I spent with the game, I felt like I never really could get a feel for if anyone was like bluffing, or if my bluff on certain things would actually get people to stop playing through it. It seems like almost always there'll be at least one person at the very end that it seems like you rarely can make everybody else just fold. They'll usually go all the way to the end and at least challenge you there, which means if you go all in, where you bet all your money all at once, basically, it usually results in you being able to, go against somebody. There's not really like a fold that happens with that or anything like that. But yeah, there's like these little Sazh faces that are in the corner where his face changes depending on what's happening in the game. He gets excited, he gets sad, his eyes catch on fire, he's got glowing eyes sometimes. They're really funny little faces and stuff like that. But it's also a part of that chronobind game, so I get the feeling it has nothing to do with the bluffing part. It's just like a general way to like spice up the presentation a little bit. Most of these games, other than the fact that like there's a fancy clock on one table, Most of the games are pretty straightforward representations of a gambling game. And so the music being like, exciting Final Fantasy 13-2 music that's reused from like the battle system and stuff like that, is kind of like the extent of the presentation. And then like Sazh, going like showing up and being like, oh, I'm feeling good about this hand kind of thing, right? And like the people that are across from you, they'll say things like, oh, I'm gonna keep playing till the end or something like that, right? So just like little jabs and things like that. So maybe a little bit more presentation than like, I don't know. I mean, I haven't played that many gambling games, so maybe a little more presentation than maybe you would expect, but nothing like really crazy or anything like that. So you have a limited amount of money in this game, and if you run out, you lose essentially. I personally think as long as you're not like playing like ridiculously risky all the time, I think it's probably very unlikely you'll actually run out of money. But kind of the goal is that when you win money from matches, they let you play in higher ranked matches, so you can bet more money. But the reality is that there's not really a ton of reason for you to worry too much about the money itself that you have. I don't know if there's any way you can relate back to Final Fantasy 13-2, like the main game, but in terms of like this individual DLC, like the only thing that matters are these things called fortune tokens. And these fortune tokens are things you earn from basically, they're essentially like from an achievement list kind of thing. It's like, oh, you knocked somebody out by, taking all their money kind of thing, right? Or, oh, you played through a full game, or, oh, you won 5 games in a row kind of thing. And when you do that, you get these little fortune tokens. And basically, in order to beat the gambling DLC, you need to basically get 30 of these fortune tokens. Doesn't really matter how much money you do or don't have, although like betting at higher values does like unlock achievements, so you'll get more fortune tokens. And at the end of the day, it only takes a few hours, I would say, to really, get through and gamble on these tables and just like grind the tables to the extent that you can get the majority of the fortune tokens that you need. There actually is like a side quest in this game, or in this DLC, that's like an exclusive side mission featuring Chocoboco Lena, I think her name is, or something like that. If you never played, or if you haven't played Final Fantasy 13-2 in a long time, like I haven't, this is the lady that was like in the red dress that like was the Chocobo lady, and she's kind of weird because Final Fantasy 13-2 is a game about time traveling, and so she shows up everywhere in time, like in every time period, and she's in every dimension, and like she's basically like an item NPC kind of thing. So I don't remember if they really explain her in the game, but for all intents and purposes, she's kind of a mysterious character. So this DLC actually like gives her backstory. So you do get to learn about like why she exists, how she exists, in all these different areas and things like that. So it's kind of like a nice little bonus story on this. And she has like a cute little hide and seek mini game kind of attached to her, where basically there's like 6 baby chocobos around the area. And it's nothing crazy, but you basically just go around and you look for these chocobos. But every area in this game is like super small, so it's like not really hard to find them. It's more about just like the interactions that you have in these little scenes. There's like a cute little chocobo love story, I think, in one case, where there's like a chocobo that's like really cool and looking off in the distance, and then another chocobo is like admiring them, like, oh, he's so cool kind of thing. And then like you have to chase them down, and when they're chasing them down, like the chocobos are just like flying around like with no real like animation. They move in the most like janky way possible, but it's kind of just fun and cute to like chase these chocobos as they fly around the screen. You just gotta press the X button on them, and because they're moving around super janky, like if you press X on them, sometimes they'll like fly all the way across the screen before they stop to talk to you, kind of thing. So it feels super low budget for the quest line, but it's like in a way that it feels like somebody was just having fun, being like, I don't know, let's have you do these like little things. More or less just like a fun side attraction, like after you've gambled a bit, go do this quest line and then go back to gambling, basically. So yeah, it's really fun and cute, and I think overall the DLC is kind of like fun and cute, despite it being like a gambling game with the story kind of thing. The few cutscenes that are here really kind of have that like Final Fantasy 13-2, or for 13 in general, kind of production level to it as well. So, I have not played any gambling games with the story before, but it is kind of nice to have like these more elaborate cutscenes as you're kind of, well, it's kind of more or less like the beginning, the Chocobo Lena stuff, and then the ending cutscenes are really the only one that are there. But it is nice to have this like story progression along with a gambling minigame. And I think all the characters they show in here, between Sazh and Chocobo Lena and the owner is the other kind of big guy in here, I think they're all like like really fun and likable characters. And, maybe it's a little, little lighthearted for the fact that like Sazh is trying to gamble his son back essentially. So it doesn't really take itself too seriously. But I think it is kind of like a fun story for like a gambling game to be like, oh, you're kind of gambling to get your son back, even if it's not like super serious about it. So I know there are more like story-based gambling games out there, at least particularly in Japan. I'm aware of a few. So I would like to maybe look at some more in the future. But this one's like super cute, and I'm glad I kind of approached it, when I did many, many years later, when I'm a lot more open-minded about that stuff. Since I think if I played it at the time, I probably would not have appreciated it, and I thought it would have been like really grindy and kind of a cop-out to do that over like, actual DLC kind of thing for that game. So, but yeah, big thumbs up for me, especially if you're like really curious about gambling games, but at the same time, if you're like, hey, I need to complete, the Final Fantasy 13-2 story, but I don't care about gambling, I think you more or less could probably skip past this or go watch the 3 cutscenes on YouTube, basically, and then feel good about it. But still, very fun game, and I got to learn how to play poker. That's something.